It might not feel like very much. Okay. You might only have $20 to put towards everything on that list every single month initially. But building the habit right now of doing those things, putting some towards debt, some towards emergency funds, some towards investing, over time you'll be able to add more to those piles, and that will keep snowballing towards a greater financial stability. Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Shaun Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life.
The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional.
Now, I'm super excited today because I get to talk to you one-on-one, and I'm super duper excited today because I got a message. One of my listeners, wanted to ask a question, and I can't wait to answer it. And this question comes from John. I'm in the midst of looking at my 457 options here at San Diego Unified, and I'm feeling restricted with just one option, Corebridge, formerly Valic. With our union, we recently got a raise, and I'm intent on investing it, but the 457 options look less than favorable. No Vanguard or Fidelity, and other funds have expense ratios starting around 0.5% or higher. So the questions are, at some point, are the fees too high and it's not worth it? And what should be the attitude or strategy when the fund options in 457s are not very good? Any thoughts about this would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, John. I appreciate you reaching out, John. I'll do my best to answer this question for you. And as I'm going to answer it, I just want to remind you that I am not your financial advisor. I do not know your entire situation. These are just some ideas for you to consider with the help of professional financial advice. I'm required to say that. Okay. My first thought for you is, what other investment options do you have? So you're talking about the 457, which is a fantastic investment vehicle, but can you invest it in a 403b that isn't horrible? A lot of 403bs are horrible, so don't just jump on that immediately. You need to double check that one as well. Or what about an HSA, a health savings account? Some of them have investment options. So do you have an HSA option? Is it investable? What are the options there? And you can also consider investing in a good old-fashioned IRA. And an individual retirement account is individual, which means that you get to decide where you invest it. You can open up an IRA with Vanguard. So if you want to start, putting that money aside, now granted, you have to jump through the hoop of I'm putting money in an IRA and then you get it in your refund and things like that. It doesn't immediately come out of your paycheck the same way, but you still get the same benefits of, reducing your taxable income with a traditional, or paying for the taxes now, but then, getting the deferred, or getting no taxes when you pull out the funds later with an IRA, a Roth IRA. You still get the same benefits with an IRA. You just don't have it come immediately out of your paycheck, but it's the same thing, really. You just can't contribute as much as well to an IRA. But if you don't like the options that you have, might as well start with an IRA. It's something else that you can do. So I wouldn't let your desire to invest in a 457 control you. So while the perks are great of a 457, right? The perks are great of a 457. I wouldn't let the perk tail wag the investment dog. Does that make sense? Right? You don't let I want my 457, which has this great, I can invest, and then I can step away from my investment, my employer, and draw those funds. That's the great perk of the 457. When you separate service, you can then get those funds penalty free. That's not a reason to invest in that if it is the worst option you have for investing. It's just a perk that happens to have. So all things equal, I would choose 457 over other options. But if you have a 2% expense ratio for 457 and a 0.01% expense ratio in your 403b, then definitely take the 403b option. So just that's the thing to consider. When you're trying to determine whether or not to even use the 457 versus the other investment vehicles you have. It's our superpower, right? Teachers have options for investing. A lot of places have a 401k, and that's it. You can invest in a 401k, nothing else. And then an IRA, because everyone can invest in an IRA. But we have most of the time we have an HSA because of the way our health accounts go. We automatically have a 403b by being a public employee. The majority of teachers also then have access to a 457 for being public employees. So there's lots of different things that you can invest in with that money, different vehicles you can invest in. So just keep that in mind as you're shopping it around. You don't have to use the 457. Now, with that being said, you asked at some point, are the fees too high and it's not worth it? And the answer is yes. There is a point at which that happens. And as a general rule of thumb, the closer you get to 1%, I think that it becomes less worth it to invest. The 1% is my personal hard and fast cap. Like, yeah, if you have an expense ratio over 1%, forget about it. Right? I'm not doing it. Just no way. Underneath that, it's more squishy, right? At what point do I say no thanks? 0.5% isn't terrible. It's not amazing, right? With Vanguard, you can get much lower because they have, down to 0.016%, which is an absurdly low expense ratio. But you can't expect that everywhere. And you probably have a more hands-on fund with a 0.5% expense ratio. Not always the better option, but if you're getting like a target date fund, that requires them to balance their portfolio over time, and that's just going to take more work. Therefore, they need a higher expense ratio. So 0.5% isn't awful. It's not great, but it's not awful. It's average. I would be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But concerns me more is the company, right? I don't know much about the company, and when I looked at it, actually, they seemed pretty decent. But the company makes or breaks the expense ratio at this squishy level, right? You have to ask yourself, are they going to nickel and dime me with other fees, right? I had one company that I was investing with who just charged me $1.50 a month just to invest with them. Like there wasn't part of the expense ratio. It's just like, oh, you use us? That's $1.50, right? And that just wasn't even in my original calculation. So you need to be aware of the random other fees that they may be charging. I'm not sure about this company. You're going to have to dive in deep with your HR to figure that out, probably, because companies don't necessarily share that information as publicly or as easily accessible as you can get it. And also surrender charges. Different companies will charge you a fee to take your money somewhere else, which is absurd because it's your money. And on their website, for Corebridge, they actually asked you if you were going to put money with them if the other company had that surrender charge. So I would be inclined to think that they don't, because they're informing you of it. Usually, a company that has a surrender charge doesn't want you to know about it. But once again, that's just a question to ask. You want to make sure that you're not going to have other expenses beyond just the 0.5%. That's the thing that's concerning. So the real takeaway for this is being invested for the long haul is more important than a 0.4 or a 0.5% expense ratio. There gets to a point where the expense ratio really matters, above 1%. But if you're being like, well, I could get a slightly better expense ratio over here or over there, you're worrying about things that aren't going to bear very much fruit in the long run. And if that's your excuse for not getting started investing, then you're really going to hurt yourself in the long run. So just 0.5%. If everything else checks out and that's the best option you have, go with that. That's what I would do. But if you have other greater options, better options, right, then go there. You just need to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, right? If you have the same expense ratio, then you want the higher return on investment potential. If you have different return on investment potentials, then the expense ratio might be different. Or if the risk factor is there, it might be different. So you need to just consider the differences that could come up that could account for the differences in the expense ratio. But if the difference is, 0.1%, it's money that you're going to have to pay out, but it might not be that big of a deal over a full career. So if you're going to go with the 457 option you have, 0.5%, not terrible. Just make sure the company is a good company. They're not going to charge you a bunch of other fees, and that you don't have a better option. Because if you have another investment vehicle you like more, like an IRA or 403b, then you can go that way. There you go, John. That's my not as short as I was hoping answer to your question about your 457, but hopefully that helped. And if you have a question that you would like to ask, you can always go to speakpipe.com/teachermoneyshow and ask me a question there, or you can send me an email, or if you have a more in-depth question, I'd love to have you on the show. You can go to teachermoneyshow.com/guest, fill out the form, and I can have you on as a guest, and we can have a great conversation helping you with your particular financial question. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about protecting yourself from financial tidal waves. Now, what do I mean by a financial tidal wave? Well, a tidal wave is something that's very sudden, right? It's something that just happens. People are on the beach, and then the next minute they're being sucked away and blown apart and pulled out by a tidal wave. It's pretty crazy stuff. If you've ever seen images of these tsunamis, these tidal waves, right? These usually the water sucks back away from the ocean, from the beach, and then comes flying onto the beach. It's very, very devastating, horrible natural disaster. And these sudden, unexpected things happen all the time in finances. So you need to be prepared for them. There are 3 steps you can take to protect yourself from a financial tsunami. You can build a 1-month emergency fund, then slowly save 3 to 6 months of expenses, then get necessary insurance. We're going to talk about each of those. So, tsunamis. These are massively destructive waves. You can't run from them. If a tsunami is coming and you are on the beach, you're in trouble. There's just nothing that you can do to prepare for that once it's coming. But you can prepare now. Okay? So I like to think about it this way. Have you ever been to the beach and like the waves are coming in and you're like, oh yeah, and you like giggle and run away from the wave, and then it goes out and you run back over and you giggle and run away from the wave again. That's kind of everyday life. You try not to get wet. You run out, you run away, you run out, you run away. And that's the regular, stuff. But if you're trying not to get wet when a tsunami is coming, you need to have more preparation in place. You need to have a shelter. You need to have a wall. You need to have something defending you against that onslaught of water, or you will get wet. Another way you can think about this is if you know the story of the wise man and the foolish man, right? The wise man built his house upon a rock. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The one on the rock survived. The one on the sand did not. We are trying to build our house on a rock. We're trying to build our financial house on a rock. So that way, when the waves come, we will not be swept out. Now, there is a fantastic story after the large tsunami that hit Japan. I guess it was probably a decade ago now. Time goes faster once you get older, I guess. But they had this huge tsunami. Tons of homes were destroyed. It's very, very sad. And as they were handling this this tsunami, they had a bunch of refugees up high on the mountain, and somebody stumbled upon a rock on the side of the mountain. Hadn't been noticed or looked at or read in hundreds of years. And it simply said, remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point. All of the houses below that point were swept away. And all the houses above that point were fine. So when we're looking at what we need to do to protect ourselves from these financial tsunamis, I recommend that we look towards old, traditional, basic wisdom. There's no flashy new thing that's going to protect us better than the traditional wisdom. The reason why wisdom is traditional is because it has traditionally worked. So the first thing that anyone who's trying to tell you how to protect yourself will tell you is build a 1-month emergency fund. Setbacks are only scary if you're not ready for them. If you're ready, they're just kind of annoying. Okay. When a financial problem hits you and you are ready, it's like, well, darn. But if you're not ready, it's the end of the world. Okay. It's, this episode's coming out in December 2023. Just watched It's a Wonderful Life, and he gets hit by this huge financial crisis of his business entire fund of $8,000. It's a long time ago. His business's entire fund of $8,000 gets misplaced, and it's the end of the world. He nearly commits suicide as a result, and that's because he didn't have that defense against that huge calamity. And if he did, it would have been a terrible setback, but he would have survived. And luckily he does. I recommend you watch the movie. But the point is that having those things in place in the case of a setback, you're much more likely to be successful. So you don't want to have to worry about what you're going to do when you have an emergency, if you have an emergency fund. So instead of wondering, what do I do first? What's the first step? If you haven't done anything financial, start by getting an emergency fund. 1 month of expenses is an adequate starting place. Now, what do I mean by expenses? Why don't I just say 1 month of income? Well, you spend a certain amount and you make a certain amount. I am hoping that the amount that you make is more than the amount that you spend. If not, working on that, right? That's why we're doing our budgeting stuff. But your expenses are what really you have to be able to cover in the event of an emergency. So having 1 month where, let's say you just couldn't work for a whole month, if you could pay for all of your basic expenses, then you've weathered that emergency. But if you can't, then you're in trouble, right? So that's why it's 1 month of expenses. That's the place to start. And that doesn't mean 1 month of all your, bills and all of your, crazy shopping habits and, going out partying or whatever it is you spend your money on, right? 1 month of expenses of the basic needs is really where you start with this. So if you have that, you have a crisis hit, you use that money to pay for it. And then before you do anything else, you just pay yourself back out of that fund. So instead of like, oh no, I have a crisis, I'm going to put it on the credit card, then you have to pay back the credit card with interest, you can pay yourself back. And bonus tip, if you pay yourself back with interest, your emergency fund will continue to grow over time. Now, once you've hit that 1 month of expenses, you can start taking a bit of a breather, right? Having that 1 month of expenses is the baseline, and you can slowly build to 3 to 6 months of expenses. Now, the order of this depends on your debt. If you have a large amount of debt, I would recommend that you pay off debt as more of a priority over getting a larger emergency fund, just because you're going to get an automatic return on your investment for paying off debt, and you will need a smaller emergency fund if you don't have to pay debt service every single month. But continue to slowly build your emergency fund, chip away at your debt, and try to build up 3 to 6 months of expenses in your emergency fund. Now, that is a lot of money, right? 6 months, let's say you make $60,000 a year, and you spend, 25 in 6 months, it's going to take you longer than 6 months to build up $25,000 worth of expenses in that account, because you have to survive. So that's going to be a long process. That's why I said slowly build it up. Don't get discouraged as you are trying to build up that amount. I'm still working on it myself. Okay, it's a long process to make sure you have that defense, that major defense. And if something huge happens, let's say you have a major surgery and you can't work, for a large window of time, having that 3 to 6 months on hand makes that a setback, but not a calamity. And let's say you're trying to build this up, okay, and you get hit by something. Well, you just pay out of it and then you start over again. It's just you're always trying to accumulate that amount of money you have on hand to be ready for an emergency. So how do you do it? Well, you save as much as you can from your regular paycheck, but knowing that that's not going to get you there very fast, you can use a side hustle to try and pad your fund a little bit. You can use like a tax return to jumpstart it, give it a little boost instead of, blowing it on a cruise or I don't know, whatever it is you're going to blow that money on, because let's be honest, we tend to blow our tax return money. But while you're doing this, there's one more important thing. As you're slowly building your emergency fund, as you're paying down debt, don't forget to also start doing a little bit of investing, right? Investing, it takes time, and you can never get that time back. So unless you are investing, right from the very beginning, you'll never be able to capture the power of the time component of investing. So that's why those things all go together. You've had your 1 month emergency fund, then you start slowly building your 3 to 6 months emergency fund and pay off debt, and also do a little bit of investing. It might not feel like very much. Okay, you might only have $20 to put towards everything on that list every single month initially, but building the habit right now of doing those things, putting some towards debt, some towards emergency funds, some towards investing. Over time, you'll be able to, add more to those piles, and that will keep snowballing towards a greater financial stability. Okay, 3 to 6 months of emergency fund is being built over time. Hopefully you get there sooner rather than later. But the next step is to protect yourself more immediately. 3 to 6 months takes a long time to build up. So while you're trying to build up, a big cash cushion, it's important that you have insurance. Now there's a balance between the insurance you need and affordable insurance, right? You don't want to have too much insurance, but you definitely don't want to have too little. So just make sure that you are insuring the things that really, really matter, and that you're protected in the event of a disaster, right? So property insurance, you don't need to have, $100,000 more than your property's value on your property insurance. Get as much as you need, not more, not less, because you don't want to be stuck with something if you have too little. So just make sure you have the right amount of property insurance. Health insurance, that's usually provided through our employer. Just make sure that you are aware of, how much you owe if a calamity happens, right? There's an out-of-pocket maximum. That is something to be considered in that 3 to 6 month emergency fund. If your out-of-pocket maximum is $12,000, you might have to pay $12,000 before they give you anything, or not anything, but before they give you, the rest of your medical costs covered. So that is a thing to consider in that emergency fund. And that might have you lean towards putting even more money in your emergency fund, depending on your health insurance. Life insurance, if you have dependents, it's a good idea to have life insurance. So that way they're protected if something happens to you. Once again, don't get too much, right? If you're only making $50,000 a year, you do not need a $5 million life insurance policy. You don't need to make it so that your family can, live high on the hog for the rest of their life. They just need to be able to get by while they're getting their feet under them. That's what life insurance is for. But if you're making $100,000 a year, giving them a $100,000 life insurance policy only gives them, 1 year to figure things out. So that's something to consider. And also there's whole life and there's term life. Whole life insurance is generally more expensive and less useful than term life insurance. There are reasons to have whole life insurance policies. Usually they do not apply. So just keep that in mind. If someone's trying to sell you whole life insurance, you need to ask yourself why. And if they don't have reasons other than just telling you, oh, it's a tax benefit. Yeah, no. Okay. Invest in term life insurance and invest the difference, and you'll get a much better benefit. That's just my 2 cents on that. Disability. Usually there's disability insurance through your employer. If you think you need more for some reason, you can look into that. Long-term care. I generally think long-term care insurance is a little expensive. The sooner you start, of course, the better it's going to be for you. But long-term care insurance is one of the most costly that there is. I personally think that if you're worried about the end of your life, long-term care, you need to look at your pension and how much that's going to be and compare that to the cost of long-term care and see if there's how much of a discrepancy that is. Because if there isn't much of a discrepancy, then as long as you're investing for your future and you have that pension, you'll be able to cover your long-term care costs with that pension. And really, you just need to determine with insurance, what you do is called a cost benefit analysis. You decide what's the best case scenario. Is this money going to a good cause in the best case scenario, which is I don't use it, so how much is it going to cost me then? Worst case scenario, if everything goes wrong, how much is it going to save me then? And then try and find the Goldilocks zone on the best insurance that way. That's how you can figure out the costs and benefits of insurance. So to protect yourself from a financial tsunami, start with the basics. Just get some money in the bank. Many, many, many people could not cover a $1,000 emergency. A lot of people can't even cover a $400 emergency. They don't have any money on hand. They don't have anything in the bank. That's going to protect you from a financial tsunami. Once you have a solid, month in the bank, then you can start growing from there, right? You can go to your 3 to 6 months, paying down debt, starting to invest. These are the things that you can do over a longer, period of time. And once again, as you have an emergency come up, pull it out of your emergency fund, refund yourself, and then keep going from there. And then to protect yourself from even larger things, since your 3 to 6 months aren't going to help you in the event of a major health crisis or something like that, make sure you have the proper insurance for all the things that are absolutely necessary. These 3 steps are going to really help you be financially stable. And when you feel financially stable, then you can start moving towards the goals of financial freedom and financial independence and so forth. So if you have any questions about, how to withstand a financial tidal wave, please reach out to me. I'd love to answer your specific question, whether it's just a quick voicemail or if it's a full-on interview. We can have a great coaching conversation one-on-one. Once again, to do that, go to teachyourmoneyshow.com/guest. And if you want to see the show notes for this show, look at the transcript or anything like that, you can go to teachyourmoneyshow.com/podcast. You'll find all of our show notes there. And I have had a great conversation with you today, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
If you'd like to come on the podcast for coaching, to share an expert opinion, or just to talk about a topic you think is relevant, I'd love to talk to you. Just fill out the form at teachyourmoneyshow.com/guest. I look forward to talking with you.